going on in this world. I could talk about that. Jesus Christ also said that there would be deception, signs, wonders, and miracles that would precede his coming. The devil deceiving, Antichrist appearing. We could talk about the revived Roman Empire, which seems to be coming into focus as we look at the European Union and their most recent treaty, which calls for a supra-state and a supra-leader of the European Union. It fits some type of a prototype or a precursor to the end-time prophecy of Daniel chapter 7. He talks about earthquakes in divers places. We can hardly pick up the paper or listen to the news without hearing about another earthquake someplace on this earth. Well, there's so much we could talk about, but look with me, if you will, to verse 15, because I want to check out verse 15, what he was referring to when he said that Daniel's prophecy would be fulfilled in this particular time. Notice what it says here in verse 15. And when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, stand in the holy place. Whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee unto the mountains. Now that terminology, if you have not been studying much about prophecy, the abomination of desolation may be unfamiliar to you. Now let me just tell you, there was a prototype back in the year 168 BC, during a period of time when the Grecian Empire was in place. The world powers were led by a man named Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus the madman. He came to Jerusalem. He walked into the temple. He desecrated the temple. He slaughtered a pig, actually, on the altar, which is an unkosher animal. He made this statement to all Jews: no more sacrifice in the temple unless it is a pig. And for a 3-year period of time, the temple was desecrated. Finally, as the Bible indicates in the book of Daniel chapter 11, there were those people who believed God, and they rose up against Antiochus Epiphanes. In history, we know that that would have been the Maccabees. Matthias Maccabee, Judas Maccabee, all of the Maccabee boys, they rose up and they ran Antiochus Epiphanes out of town. They actually then came into the temple 3 years to the day after Antiochus had desecrated the temple. They found a flask of virgin olive oil. They took the menorah, the 7-branch candelabra. They put that flask of oil into the menorah, lighted the menorah, and it should have been just lighted for 1 day, but it stayed lighted for 8 days. Thus the Jewish holy day of Hanukkah, the celebration of the Feast of Dedication, the Feast of Lights, which Jesus himself celebrated in the book of John chapter 10. Isn't that interesting? He celebrates the Feast of Lights, and in John 8, 9, and 11, he claims to be the light of the world, which is exactly what that piece of furniture in the temple, the menorah, represents, a prototype of Christ to come. Well, the temple had been desecrated with the abomination of desolation. Jesus is telling them now, sometime during this 7-year period of time, that the temple, once again, that stands on the Temple Mount in the city of Jerusalem, will be desecrated with an abomination of desolation. You have to refer back to the book of Daniel. Daniel chapter 9 and verse 27 says this: and he, the Antichrist, shall confirm a covenant, a treaty, a peace treaty, with many, with the Jewish people, for 1 week or a 7-year period of time. And in the midst of that week, he will cause the sacrifice to cease. Now that seems to indicate that if the sacrifice is going to be in process, then there must be a temple standing on the Temple Mount sometime during this 7-year period of time. Daniel's prophecy, which Jesus was referring to, says that at the midway point of that tribulation, of that time of judgment, this temple will be desecrated. You may be thinking, well, wait a minute. There's supposed to be a temple desecrated in the city of Jerusalem during this period of time, and you seem to be telling us we must be quickly approaching this time. How is that going to take place? There is no temple in Jerusalem. Yes, I know that, remember. I live in Jerusalem, have lived there for the last 15 years. There is no temple. Where that spot is located, that the first and second temple stood, there is a Dome of the Rock put up in 691 AD, a commemorative building standing on the Temple Mount. At the exact same spot, over the Holy of Holies, That foundation stone under the Dome of the Rock is where the Ark of the Covenant rested. And on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the high priest would go in and he would offer the sacrifice. And so there is no temple, but there is additional information you need to know. A temple can actually be, with our technology today, erected in about 6 months. But what must take place before that is the preparations for all of that temple operation to take place. For example, if you study the Word of God, there are 28,000 priests that are needed to operate the temple. Now, they don't all work at one time. David set out a course for each of them to work, a 2-week period of time throughout the year for the purpose of serving in the temple. They would all come together for the special high holy days of the Jewish people. But normally they would work a 2-week period of time. That's what's referred to in Luke chapter 1 when it said that Zacharias in his course was serving at a certain time in the temple complex. So you need 28,000 priests. Not too long ago, I was in a yeshiva. A yeshiva is a place of learning for Jewish young men. It's like a seminary for Christians. I walked into the yeshiva. Rabbi Nachman Kahana was seated at his computer. He was studying the Torah on the computer, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. I asked the rabbi, I was very inquisitive as to what was going on, do you use that computer for anything else? He said, I do. And I said, what? He said, I have a database on this computer. I said, a database of what? He said, I have a database of every male Jew that's qualified to be a priest. Well, I said, why? He said, because we have contacted these men, we've invited them to come to Jerusalem, and they are studying now the priestly duties. I said, whoa, wait a minute. What for? He said, because we are going to put up a temple, and they need to know how to operate the temple. I happen to be a Baptist, but I'm a Baptist-costal sometimes when it comes to certain things. And as I heard him say that, I started to get excited. But I wanted to know more about these men who were studying the priestly duties. I said, well, I know this by my study of Scripture about the priests, that they have to have a special garment. It has to be made out of one piece of cloth. I said, what about the priestly garments? He said, we have them all made. They're in storage. And now I'm lifting a bit higher off the seat as I'm listening to this rabbi tell me what's going on. I said, what about the implements that have to be used in the temple? For example, the mizrach. You know what the mizrach is? It's a pitcher-shaped item made out of pure gold and silver. It is what they put the sacrificial blood in. It doesn't have a base so you can set it down. Instead, it's pointed on the bottom so the priest cannot set this mizrach down. They have to keep it moving unless the blood would coagulate. I said, what about those? You probably need about 4,000. He said, they're all made. And as I continued to talk with this rabbi, I became very, very excited about what had been done to prepare to build a temple in the city of Jerusalem. Finally, I thought of something. I said, wait a minute. King David called for 4,000 harps to be played by the Levites and the harp orchestra when the temple stood on the temple mount. What about that, Rabbi? He said, go over to number 10 King David Street. Love that address. So I went over to number 10 King David Street, walked into the harp studio of Micah and Shoshana Harari. They had moved from Vermont over to Jerusalem, a Jewish couple. Micah was a finished carpenter. He could make anything with a hammer and saw. And I was talking to them, and they related this story to me. One day, a couple of years before I was talking with them, Shoshana had requested of Micah, her husband, for her upcoming birthday that he make her a harp. Now, at first he refused. He said, no, I don't know how to make a harp. She started, you know how you girls do. Oh, it's my birthday. I want a harp. And he said, okay, quit harping. I'll make you a harp. He went up to the Jezreel Valley, walked into a cave, found a 10-string harp carved on the wall like King David used to use, made a copy of it, came back to Jerusalem, and built the 10-string harp. The Jerusalem Post thought this was very unique. They did a feature story on it, and the journalist who wrote the story did some research and came back to Micah and Shoshana and said, hey, listen, in my story you'll read that this is the first harp that's been made in Jerusalem in 2,000 years. Well, people in Jerusalem read it. An old rabbi in his 80s read about this harp that had been made. He rushed over to the studio. He walked in. He said, you have a 10-string harp here? I do. May I see it? You may. May I hold it? And the old rabbi held this 10-string harp close to his chest. He started to weep. Shoshana said, why are you weeping, Rabbi? He said, because the Talmud extra-biblical Jewish writing. The Talmud says when a 10-string harp shows up in Jerusalem, it's the time for the coming of the Messiah. And boy, when I heard this, it moved me. We're living maybe in that day. Well, that's not all. They did not have the menorah. If you look at the relief on the Arch of Titus in the city of Rome, you will see that the Roman soldiers were carrying a menorah, the 7-branched candelabra, back to Rome. Rumor has it that it's in the basement of the Vatican. The Israeli government dispatched their minister of religious affairs to go have an audience with the Pope to ask him to confirm or deny that he had the 7-branched candelabra. He refused to confirm it or deny it. And so they proceeded to make their own replica of the original candelabra, the menorah. It now stands on display in the Cardo in the old city of Jerusalem under heavy security. All implements have been made for the coming temple. And the priests, they're studying the priestly duties. In fact, a year and a half ago on the shores of the Sea of Galilee at Tiberias, where they disappeared 1,400